I'm really excited to see you both today. Thank you for uploading all your documents and sharing all your account information. That process of looking, at everything in your life with a number on it, was that a difficult process or did you feel like you had everything ready to go already?
I think I mentioned that I usually save things at calendar year end. So I did have to go out and get more recent statements, but it's not a challenge to do that. So it was okay.
Were you the one that checked all the boxes and uploaded all the documents?
Yeah. And that's kind of the way it works in our relationship with the
She's
finances.
the accountant, yes, so I
That's
leave
true.
most of that to her.
Yeah, it kind of comes naturally.
It comes naturally to her, and she'd be very upset if I fiddle around with it and did something that was not to her standards. So, therefore, as a husband, it's like just leave it alone and let her do it.
I'd love to start. Again, I always talk about the family before the finances because, we can always figure out the numbers, but if we don't know how to fit the finances into your life, I feel like I can't really give the best advice in your interest if I don't understand your interest first. You've been married for over 26 years, right? So you were married in your mid 30s, I think, before Gene, your 35th birthday or somewhere around there. I was wondering, how did you establish your respective roles? Did you bring your money together, or did you have some separate finances in the beginning?
We were older when we got married, in different places financially a little bit, but neither of us brought debt to the relationship. That was good.
Hmm.
But and we mingled our money. And I think, kind of naturally, I guess, again, that's kind of my forte. Rick didn't have a lot of interest, I would say, in dealing with the money, the finances. So I've done it through our marriage. I would get irritated because he would say, I don't even know where our bank is because we bank with a credit union that was originally at my employer and then they moved and only had one location. So there was a few months where he was responsible for balancing the checkbooks. He did the taxes 1 year and then he was very happy to give it back because he was only doing that because I'd be like, it's time to balance a checkbook now. Here's a statement. Here's, or log into TurboTax, do those taxes. And it was only because I was making him that he did it. So would you agree?
That's pretty much. There's a little bit of embellishment there, but it's the crux of it is probably correct.
Well, it sounds like, Gene, you're a little bit like me. That idea of if you want something right, do it yourself. Is that kind of your mentality in terms of the spreadsheets?
She is very much like that. And if I had balanced the checkbook and it was off by just pennies, she would be a little bit
Hmm.
irked.
No embellishment there.
No, there
Okay.
is no embellishment there. And therefore, as a result of that, I was more than happy just to walk away from it. It's like, you do it. This is your deal. And so we've kind of kept the peace in that regard ever since.
What are some household responsibilities, on your side?
Geez, I don't know. I mean,
None.
none.
His life is good.
It's just, yeah. I
Yours
mean,
is more house and yard
I
and
do
that kind
more
of
house
thing.
and yard. So I do pretty much a lot of everything except the financial stuff. We do, collaborate a little bit on, hey, what do we want to invest in and stuff like that. But no, I mean, other than that, I mean, you would kind of think of, you could almost delineate it for the most part along the male female line of the old time relationships and
Hmm.
marriages. I think more or less. I mean, we're not strict to that, but I think you could probably count it that way. I mean, certainly when we had
Yeah.
kids and stuff like that were living at home. I mean, Jean was much
Hmm.
more of the mom. She was doing a lot of the cooking and stuff like that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. And I mean, all that just kind of felt to her you wouldn't want to eat my cooking day in day out. And the kids certainly didn't want to. So, but anyway, so yeah, I mean, I think that any kind of delineation, if you will, I think it's more of a traditional relationship in that regard.
I was looking at your social security statements. I really believe that financial documents tell a story about you and your family, not just, the black and white numbers. I looked at your earnings history and your social security statement. It batches all the older years. Both of you have been working for over 45 years in terms of earning income for social security. Going back over 20 years, you've been slowly just climbing that earnings ladder. Back in 2006, as a household, your earnings were 119,000, and last year it was over 270,000. 2006 to 2007, your income increased by 70%. That was a long time ago. I'm not sure if you remember what happened back then.
I'm sure that was a part-time to full-time
Yeah.
transition again.
What were you doing making 65,000 back in 2006?
The same role as I'm doing now for the most part.
Different company,
Different
but
company, far different company, kind of a deal. So
So you've both been climbing that ladder and working for over 45 years. So the next question here is, with decades of frugality, Gene, you really feel the frugality a lot more on your side in terms of maybe your fists are a little tighter with money than Rick would or
Rick
Rick
would
would like it
agree.
to be.
Yeah, you could use the fist analogy. I'd use another one, but that's good.
But with decades of frugality behind you, you mentioned the transition from saving to spending will be difficult. You didn't say might, you said will be difficult for you, especially for Gene. Imagine that starting tomorrow, you didn't have any earned income, you didn't have any income from a job. Like, what would be the most difficult aspect of spending for you, or just maybe having, communicating about what you spend money on?
Well, I think a hard part is going to be just that act of having to sell investments because we really haven't done that very often in our, history, and the
Buy and hold.
decisions around, yeah, the decisions around which and how do you go about that? Because
Mhm.
it's always been, save, save, save. That's pretty straightforward. You create an account and you move money into it, but to sell and then move the money out, that's harder. Big purchases are always kind of a stressful time. I mean, Rick is talking about getting a different vehicle and, kind of talking through that and deciding when to pull the trigger, and we're probably not that good about the discussions. It's more, kind of becomes the fight, or, maybe that's a little
Mm,
stronger, but he knows that I'm the one like, ooh, are you sure? Do we need that? And he's
mm.
the one like, oh, I want this. And
Did you ever hear the phrase "we can't afford that" growing up?
well, I don't think I heard that, but I think it was just very much a mindset that I was aware of. And the thing that I remember is my dad died when I was freshman in college, and there was then some money that each of the children got, even though my mom was still alive. And I remember one of my sister-in-laws saying, I never would have known that your family had money. I thought you were as, poor as we were growing up. And it wasn't the case, but I think I kind of got some of my attitudes from my parents. It's like you saved, you minimized your living expenses to the extent you could so that you had that to fall back on if you needed it.
Usually when I work with couples, typically the wife wants safety and security and the husband wants freedom. This idea of, wife wanting security and safety and husband wanting more freedom. It seems a little bit like that kind of alignment might be happening. But ironically, about, 10 to 15 years later, usually the wife still wants safety and security and the husband now wants safety and security for his wife.
Well, and I think it's kind of the traditional thing you were talking about. I mean, growing up, I knew a lot of widows, not so many widowers. So I think the expectation
Mm.
was the
Well,
woman was going to be the longer lived
well, they,
person, and
yeah,
she
yeah,
wanted to be set. And
yeah,
and I hope the husband would want to make sure
yeah.
that she was in a good position.
Or a lot of those, joint survivor annuities and making sure that you claim social security at the right time to maximize typically the widow's survivor benefit to make sure that that could carry on. Inflation adjusted. I'm sure. I know, Gene, you're real big on the the tax part of it and the optimization. We'll definitely optimize. We will definitely optimize like you like to do, Gene. What types of things do you remember your parents saying about money growing up?
Well, I heard all the arguments as a kid growing up. There was no money. I mean, it was very, very tight in the house that I grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
And as a child, I heard many of screaming match over it, frankly. And that's part of the reason why I'm a little bit the way I am, as opposed to Gene. I don't want to argue about money. I heard this nonstop as a kid, and I've told her this over time too. It's just like I'm not going to argue about this. For me, it's just we have enough money we're going to get by with, and I'm not going to fight about it after that. If I want to go get something, we'll go get something. We've got enough money, we can still survive. But I'm not going to have knockdown, drag out fights over money. I just can't do it. I refuse to do it, frankly. So that's a little bit of my own background when it comes to that. I mean, like I say, my family didn't really have a whole lot of anything growing up. It was a lot of paycheck to paycheck, frankly. Especially, I mean, when I was probably as a teenager, there just wasn't any money. So that's part of the reason why we save like fiends, if you will. I mean, that's why we
Mm.
do. We don't go out and buy the boats. We don't buy the extra car, the fancy sports car. We're not buying the cabin, lake cabin kind of stuff that a lot of people, other people will do. I just don't. we never had that. Neither one of us ever really had that growing up, and
And
I
I
just
would say I never
and I
wanted
don't,
it.
and I find myself not wanting any
Yeah,
of it.
I
Frankly,
didn't want it
to
either.
me,
I
it's
don't.
just a headache. I've known guys with boats; they break down. They're just a pain in the rear end. Same thing with cabins and stuff like that. It's like, geez, this is just another place you got to drive off to hundreds of miles over every other weekend to go take care of, and worry about paying. Somebody's going to break in the whole 9 yards. It's like it's not worth any of that stuff to me. So, I guess we keep our money a little bit more close to the vest, and I don't think we spend frugally. But again, I think that's a result of our both of our upbringings to some extent. But I think a little bit what you had mentioned earlier, the freedom idea and the security part. I think Gene is far more on the security part. I'm a little bit more at this point in time. You know what? I don't know how many years either one of us has. We can kind of spend a few bucks here and there and just not worry about it. Again, I don't want to fight about it, but we got enough money. We got a lot more money than a lot of people have got in
Mhm.
life.
Hmm.
And it's like, if we want to go out, buy a new piece of furniture, buy whatever, I don't think I'm going to sit and fret about it nonstop kind of a deal. It's like, okay, we'll do this, but we're not going to buy the fanciest thing on the block, if you will.
Hmm.
We'll just get something that's going to work for us and just call it good. We don't buy that many things, and we're not that materialistic, frankly, as a couple. We're probably way down low on the scale of here. You need this, that, and the other.
Maybe real focused on utility.
Very much so. I think it's like, what do we need to get from A to B? Just realistically, it's fine to have a few furrows along the way, but you don't need to blow over everything you've got on a bunch of nonsense, kind of a thing.
Hmm.
So I think that's
Yeah.
more or less where we're at,
Yeah.
and we've been able to save
Yeah.
money as a result of that, and help our kids along the way, and do some things that I think as a couple make sense.
Jean does admit that she's pretty tight, but I also think that based on at least the initial application, Jean, like you're looking whether for like quantitative permission or just maybe like kind of give yourself a little bit more permission to
Yeah.
say, hey, like rather than getting focused on the thing or the trip, let's maybe start thinking about like what is it that we value about this thing, and maybe thinking about opportunity cost, but looking beyond the numbers, like saying, thinking about experiences and memories that are created, not just how much something cost. And I am a money vigilant person. I'm a money avoidance person. We just bought our first dishwasher since we've been in our house for 9 years, so you can kind of see where we're coming from. If your dishwasher went out, what would be your next step?
I mean, I think we'd replace it, but we'd
Yeah, I think
look.
we would replace it, but I wouldn't. It's not like something that we'd have to turn around and do tomorrow either. I mean, there's only the two of us at home,
Yeah.
so it's
To be
more of
honest,
a,
we're using it less.
yeah, we use it
So,
way less than we did when the kids were home. I
but
mean,
you were using the example the other day about how the little plastic section where you open it,
oh,
it's cracked, and it has been for a while. It was not well made. They don't reinforce that. But
Hmm.
you were almost saying it like the sense of you would replace it because of that. It's like that would be the last thing I'd do. There'd be duct tape on that thing for years
Like keep
until
it
the
keep it running as long as possible.
until the utility of it didn't work. I don't care about the looks of it so much. But if it can't perform its function, then it's like, okay, then it's time to replace. But and that was an extreme. He wouldn't replace it for that. But
Gene, are you a researcher when it comes to buying things? If you decide to buy something, do you do a lot of research before you go and buy the thing?
I wouldn't say a lot, but some. And I'm very much the type I'm willing to walk away if I feel like I'm not getting, the price that I think it's worth. And I think that served us. And I was going to say, we haven't bought brand new vehicles. We've bought low
yeah,
mileage
yeah.
vehicles and have had some good ones that we've then kept quite a while. But we also went in kind of like we were ready to say, nope, we'll walk away from this one.
So, Gene, I noticed that your mother Lola, she valued education. Both of you went to college. Your daughters are continuing their education with graduate school. In which ways do you plan to continue your education, or just keep your mind sharp, right, as you move into retirement?
I personally don't see any formal education. I think I'm past that point. I mean, I've always liked to read, and now it's become more reading online or, looking at
Hmm.
websites following current events and stuff like that. I think, you mentioned travel, and that is something we hope to do. And I would say the travel that I enjoy the most is to see like the architecture or the history of places. And so kind of experiencing it that way.
I don't think I would be pursuing anything formal per se at this point either, but I mean, I do have interest in things, and I read more things about different things than I probably ever did in the past. I mean, teach his own. I mean, I used to be a big history buff. I used to read a lot of stuff on history type related things. And I've kind of changed focus a little bit over the last few years. And I don't know, maybe it's just age related, but I mean, I read a lot more like religious type stuff and stuff like, but the history of religion type things. And I can see myself doing that kind of stuff for quite a while because there's an awful lot of that to actually, if you really want to get into it and go through. It's just mostly on my own, looking stuff up, things that I have an interest in, or had an interest in the past. That's like, hey, I've got some time now. Maybe I'll just look into it a little bit more. How does something work? Kind of a thing. I mean, as an engineer, we come across all kinds of different. In the world that I'm in, it's just which is building design. I mean, there's all kind. There's a million different things that have come into building design, and I find myself sometimes late at night just kind of looking on the internet for odds and ends things that the vast bulk of people probably would never take an interest in.
Really complex bridges and things like that are really interesting. Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. I look at something like that. I look at, like, well, like you throw out a bridge, the Firth of Forth Bridge. Okay, that's an example. It's a very old bridge built, 150 years ago almost now. It's like, think about that. I look at that one. It's like, my God, that's an astounding accomplishment the way they did this. And they did this without all the equipment and the knowledge and the whole 9 yards that we have now. It's like, how did they manage to do this? So I look up stuff like that late at night. I read about some of that kind of stuff. I find that fascinating. I mean, to me, this is endlessly fascinating. So I've got many years worth of looking at that stuff if I want to, let's put it that way. And I probably will look at a lot of that kind of stuff going forward.
I love how much like energy and excitement you have over that. In your initial application, you mentioned wanting to travel in the early years of retirement. Those go-go years as they call them, the go-go, slow go, and
Mm-hmm.
no-go typically. And
Mm-hmm.
then Gene, you mentioned that Rick, you really like European travel. What was the most incredible trip you've been on so far?
Well, it's going to be a couple of them, but if I had to narrow it down, probably the one that we had taken to Italy, where we went to Florence, for example, and they've got the Duomo, which is like the biggest domed building that has been built. And again, they did this back in the 1500s. And if you stand there, it's 190 or 200 feet across, and it's 400 or 500 feet above the ground by the time you get to the top of it. And they did it with no scaffolding, and it's just guys hanging on ropes and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, you look at stuff like that, and again, you just marvel, and it's like somebody did this, and it's like, how in the world did they actually accomplish it? To
Mm.
me, all that stuff is just wild. It's just amazing. The bridges, the buildings, the whole 9 yards from hundreds of years ago, and the best place for me to go see that is in Europe, and that's what I really enjoy. So
Yeah.
I like seeing things like that, going to
Mm.
places, because to me, a little bit of the travel stuff, you get that, you see when you can see it for real. It just adds an extra dimension to it than just reading it online or reading it in a book or something
Mm.
like that. You get the scale of it and the whole 9 yards, and the only way you can experience that is to go there. And it's that kind of
Wow.
thing that I'd still like to be able to do as retire and stuff like that. And like you say, you only have so many years that you're probably really able to get out and do a lot of this kind of stuff. And I mean, when I'm 85, if I live that long, chances are I'm not going to be hopping on a plane and doing 12-hour air flights to Europe, kind of a deal. I'm much more likely to be doing that in the next 10 years time frame, kind of a thing. So, I mean, to me, that's part of the deal with the money. It's like, we can do some of these things. We can take a trip or two trips a year.
Mm.
It does take a chunk out of the chain, out of the bank, but I think that we've saved enough that those trips, we're not going to the 5-star hotels. We just don't do that when we travel even. I mean, we're going to the B&Bs that don't cost that much. Maybe they're off the beaten track, kind of a thing. But we enjoy that, frankly. I think you see more of life doing that
Mm.
than staying at the
That's
5-star Hilton. I look forward to being able to do that. And I mean, to me, that's what you're saving money for. And to be able to spend some of it in retirement. Granted, you want a nest egg for safety and security if something bad happens, God forbid. But you still got to live a little bit too. I mean, you're still breathing, you're still upright, you're still able to do things. I mean, take advantage of it. So I guess that's kind of my outlook for a lot of that stuff. Again, I'm rambling.
No, I no the rambling tells me a lot about just that again. The alignment of money and what you value. Like that's what financial planning should be about, right? Is like getting to that point of saying, Your excitement when you see something like not just in a book, but like in real life, like like scaled up, like that is utility that can't be that you can't put into a spreadsheet, right? Like that's a
Right.
form of
Right.
you're like oh like I can't quantify that feeling, but I'd be willing to like pay an extra $1,000 to see it again.
Right, exactly. I mean, and the memories are, they're invaluable. You can't put a
Mm,
price on some of just
mm,
the memories that I have from going there and just walking down some of the streets and stuff like that. I still remember things from 15 years ago, clear as a bell, kind of a thing, from walking down an
mm,
oddball street of all things. It's just like the memory comes back and it's like, yeah, I remember there was some windows that were beautiful with flowers and blah blah
mm,
blah, stuff like that. That just again, you're not going to get that in a guidebook or something like that, but just experiences. To me, they're worth a lot of money,
mm.
even if they don't cost that much in the big scheme of things. So.
What is it like watching Rick get excited when he sees those things?
This will be an interesting answer.
No, I mean, it's good. We enjoy things differently. And so some of it is just, it's nice to see him experience and take pleasure. Even, well, this year we went to Maui and I've been there before, but Rick hadn't been. So, a lot of the stuff we did, it'd be, what do you want to do? Because I've done it. It's not up to me. And seeing him enjoy it, in some ways I was laughing because he's taken a ton of pictures and it's like, yeah, I'm not taking any because I've been there, I've seen it. I don't tend to go back and look at the pictures, so it's like, but sure, go ahead and do that if you want. So it's kind of living vicariously or re-experiencing it
Mm,
through him,
mm.
is good. I think we've exhausted the places I've been that you haven't for the most part. So that's probably done.
What are the parts of travel that you enjoy, Gene?
Going with others so that you can, because if I've gone places on my own and totally alone, and so it's like, okay, there's nobody to talk with about it afterwards or to reminisce about it years down the road. So I think that's a key part of it is traveling with people. And I've had opportunities to travel with my sisters over the years, longer ago, and then with Rick when we were first married, and then we've taken some really nice trips, I think, with our kids, and it's not been every year or multiple times a year, but there have been definitely some big trips and then some smaller, trips. Luckily, we have family spread out, so we could go see family and also see new parts of the country, and did that as they were growing up too. So a lot of it is the fact that you're building memories, and a lot of it is the reminiscing. I think without that, you lose a lot because that's where even I say to Rick now, we don't know a lot of the same people. And so without that common ground to talk about, what does one discuss, even with people well, if you don't have some common experience uh, you know, or relationships with other people, it makes it hard. So that helps to build that common experience as well and to share it with the person.
Does it feel like life is very structured and not a lot of change happening?
Not a lot of
Uh,
change happening, but boring. I mean,
yeah, I mean, it can get boring, obviously. Yeah,
you
but
know, Rick, I give him a hard time because he and our oldest daughter will be talking and they're both saying, not much new here. And then I hear again, not much new here. And yet the conversation continues because, yeah,
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 yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I would love for you to tell me a little bit about your church and kind of how you got plugged in there. And then what is that like? Is that community really important to you?
When we first met, I was a member of a church that actually one of my family members had belonged to, and my aunt and uncle are members there too, Catholic Church. And so we were going there. That's where we got married, but just in the chapel. We had a small wedding. And so when our children were born, they were baptized there. They went to the grade school there. And that was important to both of us. We had both gone. I mean, Rick went through Catholic high school. I didn't have that opportunity, but we had both gone to Catholic grade school. And I think even though we visited the public schools, that was always kind of part of our plan from the beginning was that we wanted them to go to a smaller school because we're in a city where the schools are large too. And my background was definitely very small and rural. His was larger, but we wanted them to be in that smaller setting so that they could be more known and make those connections with classmates and such. And so while they were at the school, especially, we were more involved, I think, in the school and the church, and even beyond that when they were still at home. But in more recent years now, with when they're gone, and I think transition from it's hard when there's somebody you really like who's running the
Yeah,
church, and then
they
they
change.
don't stay forever, and
Right.
so there
Oh,
was a
yeah, like the
change
commission
there.
and yeah, just the shifts
Yeah,
and yeah, that's
yeah. So there
difficult.
was a change there. So we have actually even started going a bit to another nearby church
Mm,
and kind of like that better, but we haven't officially changed. We've talked about moving to a more retirement friendly state because the state we're at is high tax. Where I grew up, it was still in this state, but right on the border. And so then my desire would be to move there. And it's partly
mm,
because where I grew up, the community was very much based on the church, and we were
mm,
all it was very had the same origins, and so I was related to many people. I grew up with many cousins
mm,
around me and stuff, and some of them are still there. None of my immediate family, but cousins and stuff.
mhm,
So we go back there. We go to that church. I know probably 80% of the people there, and that has meaning for me. And the church is at risk of being closed and stuff. And so
mm,
I've kind of gotten more involved in trying to help it continue and put in place some financial and other efforts to try to give it more life. And so
mm,
that's a pull for me also to that area. And so I could see myself, if we were to retire there, being more involved in the community and the church there because it's got the history for me. But
mm,
it's not where Rick is from, and so that's not as
mm,
appealing to him.
I'm not passionate about the location that Gene wants to go to. I don't know that I'm necessarily passionate per se about
mm,
most things. I Part of the issues that I have with where she wants to go, I mean, it's the weather is the same. It's windier out there, kind of a thing. It's just I just look at it from that standpoint, and it's like, well, we can go south someplace, and it's much nicer
mm,
for much more of the year. For me, I've got family that's more down that direction.
mm,
So while her pull is to this other location, I guess my pull would kind of be the opposite kind of direction, more or less, back to where my own family's at. And again, we're both at the tail ends of our family. I'm the youngest one of my family, and she's just about the youngest. And so it just again, everybody's getting older. I've got
mm,
my oldest sibling is 13 years older than I am, and it's kind of a deal. It's like, well, just being realistic, how many more years do some of my siblings even have? And
mm,
if I move farther away, well, that's less chance that I'm ever going to see them very often, type of thing. So all those types of things weigh on my mind a little bit as well when it comes to moving and retirement. But the one comment Gene made is that where we live at now, the state that we live in is very high taxed. They tax everything, and it seems like it
mm.
never ends.
Especially as you're taking distributions that may or may not be efficient.
Exactly. It's like I'm taking money out of a pot that's limited here. I don't have a whole bunch of,
Mm,
I don't have a salary coming in anymore where we can replenish this. It's coming out
mm,
of what we saved. And, we've already been taxed on a lot of it the first time around. And it's like, I feel like I'm getting nailed again for it. And it's like, why? This is crazy. I mean, let's move on, do something else. But I'm not wed to any one location. Again, there are lower tax states, for example, or a handful of them around the country. Several of them are within adjoining states to where we're at. And it's tough for us too because we've got a daughter that lives in this area. She doesn't ever want to leave this area. She doesn't express any desire to go anyplace else. And for us, that's a
mhm,
little tough. Again, it's
mm,
like we only have two kids, and it's like it's tough to move away and be that much farther away from them too. So there's a lot of things that weigh into the decision on taking off and moving to a different spot. I mean, what she's talking about as far as just she has a lot of shirt tail relatives and stuff like that, and she knows a lot of people out in this community. I mean, that's all well, fine and good, and that's great. But I don't know anybody out there. And she says, "Oh, you'll get to know people. Well, when you're my age, the friendships like that, you're not 12 years old making friends anymore."
Gene said you like golfing. I'm guessing that's not just by yourself when you go.
No, I mean, I go golfing with guys that I work with and people that I'm associated with working, and they're all from here, obviously. And if we pick up and move and go 300-400 miles away, obviously those bonds like that are all going to be broken. So that's
Mm,
a little tough. When I look at that, it's like, okay, well, that to me, that's has been for many years a good social outlet or whatever you want to call it.
the weekly breakfast group type of
Kind
situation.
of exactly like that. I mean, for us, it was like every Tuesday. Here, we're every Tuesday when there's not snow on the ground, we're going to golf, kind of a deal. It's been that way for a long
Okay.
time. It's tough to just cut ties with that and walk away from it. The financial stuff is obviously that is a big driver, but it's not everything. And
Hmm.
again, it's like, can we make something work? Maybe we can, maybe we can't make it work out where we can make everything kind of
Hmm.
balance in some fashion, or at least balance to a point where we're happy with it. We're in the process of weighing a lot of that stuff at this stage of the game,
Hmm.
and where we're going to end up with, I don't know. I really don't. Um,
Right.
but we'll find out. That's part of the journey.
Debt equals zero. So how long have you been out of debt?
I think it was 2008,
Long
the
time.
last recession. We were pretty low on our
Wow.
mortgage already
Wow.
anyway, and we said, let's just pay it off.
Yeah.
We've always paid our credit card off in full each month too, and stuff like that, and no student
Yeah,
debt.
that's
So
great.
we told our kids going in, it was, you're going to pay a portion of your schooling. In the end, neither did for their undergrad. But even then, looking at graduate school, when they were first looking at it, it's like, this is on you, but don't go borrowing. Come to the bank of mom and dad.
Right.
We didn't want them incurring a lot of debt on their own if we could help out, but it was going to be with the expectation that, someday you'll pay back.
Sometimes there's this concept that I talk with people about. It's a oops money and ooh money, which is it's that idea of giving your adult children permission to ask for money. Some families say, you're only kind of allowed to ask for money in an oops situation, like, oh, mom and dad, my car broke down, my max out of pocket, could you help with that, mom and dad? And then on the flip side, there's like this ooh permission that some, much more rare, but some families get to the point of saying, hey, like, I'm not only going to help them with the oops and the emergencies, but I'm also going to help them with some exciting opportunities. Have you thought about this idea of kind of giving, your daughters permission to ask for money? Like, do they know that permission exists?
I think in the oops situations, well, they know they might get scolded depending on what the situation was, that we're in a position to help. I think they would both know that. And I think we kind of were recently going through those discussions about buying a condominium rather than renting. And we were willing to help out, but kind of landed in a place where agreed that maybe this wasn't the right time for that, the market and interest rates and stuff like that. So, because they know I'm inclined to analyze the thing and say, well, is this the best financial decision? There's maybe some hesitance to bring it to me. And he's a little bit of the soft touch, So at least
Go
on
at,
smaller
go
stuff,
ask mom, go
they'll
ask
go
dad.
back door just to dad and,
Yeah, that happens quite frequently.
yeah.
But like you said, though, we have had that approach here just recently, not too long ago, about looking at a property, going in with it, if you want to call it that, with our daughter,
Mhm.
and trying to make the numbers work. In the end, it just didn't, for us, it didn't make sense. We're not slamming the door on such a thing, if you will. I think we'd be open to it. But again, it's got to make some sense. I don't think we're just willing to just throw out a
Yeah.
bunch of money to you, say, yeah, no problem. Just
I
hang
would
on to it.
say two things about it. I mean, from the time they were working, we funded Roth IRAs for them. So they didn't have to put
Yeah.
their earned income into it, but we put the equivalent into it. And we did that until, well, I did for the younger one just recently. And now they're like, they've both been given equal. And so I told her,
Mm.
we're done,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
she's out of college anyway. So that's appropriate in my mind. Once you're out of school, you should kind of be self
yeah. You're on
sufficient.
your own.
We've provided them with the foundation they need in terms of
Mhm.
education, some retirement savings already. Uh, so I don't feel an obligation to leave them money. If we do, great.
Mhm.
But I think our first goal is to provide for ourselves so that we aren't a burden on them. I don't need a lot of money. I just want $1 more than I can possibly spend. And it's kind of that, you want to kind of be
Well,
close to
I want
zero
my
at the
last check
end.
to bounce. Right. If I
Yeah,
could.
there you go.
The goal isn't to have the biggest pot of money and see how much money you have when you die, kind of a deal. Um, I mean, we saved it, it was our money, if you will. And I just feel like, hey, if we want to spend it on something, great. That was the whole purpose of it from the get go. If we pass away and there's money left for our kids or something like that, great, more power to you. I mean, I never had that opportunity when I from my parents. And it's
Mm,
like, if that happens, great. Again, like I say, but that's not the goal here. The goal is for us to be able to live comfortably, if you will, in retirement. Just do the things that we want to do, but make certain that we've
mm,
got a backup in case one of us gets sick or both of us get sick or something happens, God forbid. And, that we're, again, like Gene said, we don't end up becoming a burden on the kids.
if you were to put all the money into one total portfolio for your household, it would be about a little over $5.8 million. Of that 5.8 million, 34% of it is in taxable brokerage or checking, savings, and taxable brokerage. 53% is in the pre-tax accounts, right, which will be all taxable at ordinary income, wherever you are, state-wise and federally, of course. And then 13% in tax-free. When I say that number, 5.8 million, what's the initial thought that comes to mind? And I'll start with Eugene.
Yeah, I think we're good. It's kind of been that feeling more the last several years. And so certainly I think at the level we're at, I've probably for the last 2 or 3, I've been like, okay, I think we're good. Do we want to retire? Do we want to talk about, actually making a change? And especially now that both kids are done with college, feeling much more comfortable thinking about that. So I feel like, hey, we're there.
Which dollar amount did you start to say, like, I think we're good? At what point did you feel that way?
I think it was 3 to 4 million, and that might be higher than a lot of people think. But I'm thinking about the fact that a good chunk of that is in the traditional. It's like you do these calculators to say if you have enough, but they never say what type is this. And so I see that weakness in those calculators right away. It's like, yes, but if I
Mhm.
take out, if I need 100,000 a year to live on, I'm going to have to take out 160,000, and they don't seem to build that in. And so that's why I didn't feel as comfortable when it was, a
Mm.
million or 2 million. But once it got up, into those next digits, and it's like, okay, I think this might be at the level we need. But for first healthcare until we're 65, and then that issue of the long-term care needs. But for those, I would have been comfortable long ago because I feel like our living
Mhm.
needs aren't that much. I mean, yes, we would like to travel, but if we didn't, it wouldn't have been, the end of the world kind of a thing. Or we could do it on a, more on a budget basis or a lesser basis and still get to do some. So I
Mm.
would have felt like had we needed to, or had circumstances kind of pushed us to
Mm.
retiring sooner in the absence of the healthcare stuff, it wouldn't
Mm.
have been a problem. I would have felt comfortable, like we can live on this, we can manage.
So we will talk about asset location and also talk about tax location of which types of accounts make sense to shift your assets around, your equity and fixed income, and we'll optimize the portfolio to make sure that everything's aligned. I said that every dollar needs a job and a use by date. Once you know what the money's for and when you're anticipating to use the money or give the money, right? Then it's much easier to align that with the risk and return expectations of their investments. I can see you're already thinking about these things in terms of your tax-free accounts are a lot, those are usually the last money to be spent. So let's get those more aggressively invested. And the money that we're using to support our few first 5 years in retirement, let's keep that, with an objective of liquidity and stability. So you're doing a great job. And Rick, Gene's doing a great job already thinking about those advanced concepts, as you might have thought, might have realized. Rick, when you hear 5.85 million, what's your initial thought?
I guess my initial thought is that's quite a bit more than a lot of people have. And
Hmm.
I think that kind of, I mean, obviously, I think that's from our perspective, that's pretty good. I think that
Hmm.
provides us with a lot of security, if you will, at least as much as
Hmm.
we can anticipate at this point in time in our life. To me, it's interesting you asked Jean what the number was that she started feeling comfortable with. My number for that would probably be quite a bit lower, frankly, because we do not live an extravagant lifestyle. It's funny. I mean, you make a comment, well, here our expenses are going to be $100,000 a year. Well, hell's bells. I mean, I just get realistic about this. Food and electricity, heat for the house, that kind of stuff, and insurance. By the time you add all that stuff up, I mean, it's a substantial amount of money. But my gosh, I mean, we can pay that portion of those costs for a long time with the money that we have saved. And then we've got quite a bit on top of that to be able to play with, if you want to call it that, to do some other things with.
You are financially independent, the ability to work because you want to, not because you have to. We're looking at a possibility that, you could have the capacity to possibly triple or quadruple what you spend a year. If you never had to worry about money ever again, would you put in your 2 weeks notice at work, or would you want to keep working until is there certain projects that you really want to get accomplished before you retire?
Well, I mean, boy, that's a good question. I mean, I'm ready to retire fairly soon, but yeah, shoot, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not,
How long would you want to give on your employer notice to feel respectful about it?
I've already told them. I mean, I've already given them notice for, I'm not going to work through next spring.
It's going to be on
Kind of a
YouTube
deal.
later on, boss. So
Well, that's fine. Yeah. Well, but I've already told them that, and they're aware of that. I mean, so I mean, I've got a deadline date in mind. I mean, I pretty much have the clock is ticking for me. Like next March. I mean, we're doing this in May, and so so I've got 8 or 9 months more probably is pretty much the maximum time that I'm planning to work, and I think Gene would probably punt and probably throw in the towel at the same time would be my guess, if we could do it that way.
have you worked with a financial advisor before?
No, not really.
Have you ever felt the need for kind of like a third party to step in and kind of give you that extra level of clarity?
Well, yeah, and I think that's what I was thinking about and why when you had the opportunity, why I jumped on it, because especially with regard to that, what investments to use first, how to structure it, I was feeling a real need there and was thinking
Mm,
about how we were going to either get educated on it or approach it, especially as
mm,
we were getting closer to being real. Again, I think the accumulation phase is very easy, or at least it
mm,
was for us, and it's more that transition and planning for how to move forward
mm.
that's more challenging.
Have you considered hiring somebody to like be the person who makes the trades, sends you the money to your bank account? Like, have you considered that type of relationship before?
We don't do a lot of transactions, and I don't even see doing that in the future. We're in some very, mutual funds that are pretty good and straightforward, and we've got some things that are a little more low risk, and I'd want to keep a mix there, but I don't want to bear the consequences of making significant moves other than within the areas where it's protected and it wouldn't affect it. And if that's pretty straightforward, I think I can handle that. I can do those things.
We've got a handful of investments. We don't switch things all the time. It's not rocket science to just don't lose your money, if you will. Just put it in some investments. Be reasonably conservative with some of them. You can take a chance with some, but you're not playing roulette here. And just do some common sense things, and you can maintain the assets that we have and still grow it. And I think we can do
Mm.
that on our own for the most part.
I'm very different from a lot of advisors. I believe that you can successfully manage your own money. That you don't need to work with a financial advisor to be successful financially. I mean, you've gotten to this place, right? I really believe that the time should be spent in the planning, not in the implementation. The clients that I work with, we create a system where they only spend 30 minutes twice per year managing their investments.
Wow.
I don't think you need help with the management part. I think the part that we'll really spend most of our time in is kind of asking the questions of like what do we want this money to support? What's the why behind the portfolio? Right? That we're building a life, not just a portfolio. So we can get the portfolio aligned, but we need to we'll focus a lot more on really the aspects of like when you look at your accounts, you immediately know that money's for this, that money's for this, that money's for this. Maybe it means setting aside a separate bucket just for non-essentials that says, hey, this is the money you could spend that could leave your life this year that wouldn't affect your financial objectives. Say, hey, we're going to set up a travel fund of $30,000 a year. You're not allowed to have any money left in there by the end of the year, right? We'll make a game out of spending. If it comes to that place where the only way you spend money is having some sort of accountability or kind of gamify it, rather than spending time together, clicking buttons and moving investments around, we'll spend that time like actually booking those flights. Like that's what I think you need to spend more time booking flights than looking at your investments moving forward.
I would like
uh,
that.
that sounds like a lot of fun.